Hi everyone. In today's episode, we are going to talk about the effective measurement of sales productivity through sales activity tracking. In today's podcast session, we have Michael Parry, who is the head of sales operations at Observe.ai. He'll help us answer some of these questions around tracking seller activities, tracking leading indicators, and using that to drive revenue and high performance. Welcome to the Revenue Lounge, Michael. We are very excited to learn from you today.
Thanks, Abhijeet. Thanks for having me. Excited as well.
So very excited to learn more about you and your experience as well. And that's what is my first question. If you can give our audience a quick introduction about yourself and tell us about your role at Observe, that would be a great start.
Yeah, great. I run sales operations at Observe. Observe's a AI platform for the contact center. So we're giving contact center companies that run a contact center 100% visibility into their customer interactions, and then we analyze them for key moments that happen throughout that call, right? And we've all been there where we're on a call and this call will be recorded for quality purposes. And we're effectively build some software to give those companies 100% of visibility into those calls versus what happens today is maybe 1 or 2% ever gets analyzed, right? And then we can use that data to help drive better agent performance and hopefully better customer experience and other business outcomes for those companies. So
yeah, that's phenomenal. And I did recall seeing Observe at a few places winning awards for the groundbreaking AI technology that your team has developed. So congratulations for that and great going. So why don't you walk us through your story? Like, how did you get into revenue operations? What was the journey like?
Yeah, coming out of school, I spent a couple of years as a tennis coach and a tennis pro, kind of teaching kids and adults how to play tennis. I was working at a country club here in Silicon Valley, and a lot of technology executives and people were people that I kind of worked with and played with every day, right? So got interested in that world and eventually took the leap and got off the tennis court and became an SDR. Took a lot of kind of work to break in, but eventually got in and with a small data forecasting and pipeline management company. And we were only about 30 people at the time. And the great thing about startups is you get to wear a lot of hats. And so I was able to not only be the SDR, but also start to learn about Salesforce. And that's when I became a Salesforce admin and kind of ran that and then never looked back since then. Kind of knew that I loved that space and getting to work with the different groups and throughout the company and the visibility that you have, right, kind of within sales, revenue ops. That was kind of the journey. And then went from that small startup to another startup in ServiceMax. And that's where I spent the last 7 years before jumping back to more of the startup Observe and wanting to build a great team again. So.
No, I absolutely love that story for two reasons. Number one, I think you've got background in sports, which is amazing. I mean, I personally am a big believer on drawing parallel between sports and sales. They go hand in hand. There are a lot of like best practices and principles from sports and sports management that can be used in sales and sales management. And the second thing that I liked about your journey is that you were an SDR first, you were a user, you went through the grind and you basically used a system and then you became a sales ops professional where you could have a user empathy as well when you'll design and configure the CRM and scale out the tech stack, right? So I think for those two reasons, I absolutely love that journey of yours and no wonder you're doing great in your current role and delivering so much value at Observe and done the same thing with your other organizations before. So tell us a little bit about like the sports performance management experience. I noticed that you were a high performance sports scientist at UC Berkeley. So from driving high performance for your team there to driving high performance out of your reps as head of RevOps. So what are the parallels that one can compare?
Between kind of being a tennis pro and jumping into technology, I was also jumped into as a sports scientist at UC Berkeley. At the time, they were building a high performance program trying to. So we were basically using science to try and predict and help the athletes recover. And so basically what I was doing all day was doing a lot of heart rate testing, and also I would test their IgA, which is a immunoglobulin, basically take a swab out of their mouth and then test their IgA, which tends to spike from stress, right? It's not only good stress in terms of, hey, we just had a really hard workout, but also, hey, my dog died or my boyfriend broke up with me or whatever the case may be, right? It's all stress that can lead to poor performance. So yeah, we were trying to use data and science to optimize kind of the recovery, which then leads to better performance there, which is, kind of the same thing we're doing in sales and RevOps, right? Is how to use the data to impact performance and help coach your AEs and SDRs and teammates.
Yeah, I think the power of leading indicators, one use case where you're driving sports performance and one use case when you're driving revenue efficiency. So thanks for taking us back in that experience. The second question I had for you was largely going deeper into this whole leading indicator based activity selling, right? I mean, when you talked about tracking these activities, tracking these leading indicators, how do you think this helps in improving seller productivity and accelerating revenue?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think when it comes down to it, right, the activity that we do every day is the one thing that's in our control, right? We can't always control the outcome, right? Working a deal and the budget gets cut at the last minute, right? The company gets acquired, right? And now that deal goes sideways. So we can't control all those factors, but at the end of the day, it's what are we doing on a daily or weekly basis? And what are those activities that lead to a successful selling motion, right? Or give us the best chance to ultimately win that deal, right? Which is what we want to do.
I like to share this interesting insight from a Gartner survey that I read. It basically mentioned that 68% of sellers, in fact, often find themselves merely going through the motions in their job to meet activity tracking requirements. So unless activity tracking is meaningful, it just ends up wasting precious time that could have been utilized elsewhere, right? So how do you suggest one moves from tracking activities for just checking boxes, kind of an exercise, to tracking activities which can be the best meaningful value for a seller's time?
I think at the end of the day, it comes down to you have to kind of complete the circle, right? You have to provide the feedback so it's not just check the box and move on, right? I had a mentor early on, right, who talked about reporting the news versus making the news, right? And us as sales ops leaders or obviously frontline managers and otherwise, right, when we're working with AEs or SDRs, it's not just did you do the exercise, but how do we coach them to or use those as coaching opportunities to help them improve, right? Help them build more skills. So it's not just a meeting or an inspection, right? But it's that coaching opportunity. I think it is hard work because managers and sales ops people, we get pulled in tons of directions. So it's something just need to commit to and then recommit to all the time, right? But as a quick example, right? Like if you're looking at activity on a specific deal, right? And it's like, hey, I need to get higher or I need to get to the economic buyer. Well, yeah, that's true, but that's kind of obvious, right? Like we all want to be talking to the higher people that make the decisions. But the conversation really needs to be more around how can I help you do that, right? What activity can I do to help you get there or accomplish that? I think that's really where the conversation needs to go so it doesn't feel like a check the box exercise, but it's more of a coaching and getting better, right, exercise.
I love the tagline there, reporting the news versus making the news. I think there's a big difference out there. And I think how do you get your reps to focus on these leading indicators to drive higher performance and use them as coaching opportunities versus doing a diagnostic on what went wrong. I think the whole leading indicator concept is very powerful. Moving on to the next question, Michael, what are these activity metrics that you'd advise sales ops people out there should start tracking to see how productive are their team? What are those top metrics that you would recommend teams to start tracking?
I'm a big fan overall of just keep it simple. We can measure everything in the world, right? And there's a lot of potential noise out there, but I think if we just boil it down to, I think Mike Weinberg does a pretty good job of this, of what does an AE do? He creates advances and closes opportunities, right? But on the activity side of it for AEs, we're really looking at, again, on the front end, more leading indicators, right? Is just what new opportunities are created, right? And how many first meetings have they had in a given week or month, right? Whatever period we're looking at. And then you start drilling down from there, right? So if we see, hey, the guy or gal in the Northeast has a lot of activity, then great. And we can dive in there in terms of what are they doing, right? Where are those activities, where are they putting their time to get those results, right? And then on the flip side, obviously, is just, hey, we see someone not creating opportunities. Let's dive in there. What activity are they doing, or maybe they're not doing, right? And diving into there, not only for, is there a messaging problem? Are they active and they just not getting the results, or obviously, are they just not active? And that's obviously a separate conversation, right? But again, really keeping it simple. And then I think for the SDRs, same thing, right? We goal our SDRs on qualified meetings. And the only way you get qualified meetings is obviously if you have connections, right? And the only way you have connections is, so you start peeling back the onion, right? Like connections back to calls or emails, or again, what's kind of your cadences, how often you touching people. But those leading, or I guess I'll say those lagging indicators of qualified meetings and stuff happens from kind of the daily activity that we're doing, right? So keeping a pulse on that.
Yeah, definitely. I think it shows spotlight on the gaps between skill and will as well. As you pointed out, first of all, if the activities are happening or not, and if they are not happening, there could be a big issue around the will of the person. Then that's, as you mentioned, is a different issue to tackle. Or if activities are happening but the output is still not there, so I think there's a coaching opportunity from a skill standpoint, or it could be a feedback around whether there is a product market fit problem. But I think tracking activities is the way to go there. I mean, if you don't have that fundamental unit of measurement from a sales parlance, which is the activity and the touch point with whom the activity has happened, you can't get started, right? So we hear you on that. Would you be able to share like some examples from your experience across different companies you've worked with, like how tracking these activities and these conversations have helped progress your colleagues or the team that you coached?
Yeah, sure thing. So again, I think it comes back to completing that loop, right? So one of the things we're doing now that actually we didn't do at my prior companies is taking these recorded calls or taking some of the meetings and having the entire team watch it and then provide feedback. What went well, what didn't work well, what could have improved. I think that's really, again, that peer-to-peer learning, I think is key. And then again, it turns into less of an inspection point and more of a coaching or a learning opportunity, right? I think about just how many initiatives get rolled out and then they don't get followed up on, right? So there's no accountability. In which case the reps just feel like, hey, I'm just doing all this work. And that's when it feels like the check the box. So that's one thing that's really, I think, worked well. The last quarter that we started to roll this out is just doing some of this peer-to-peer stuff. All of our managers also watch the videos, so they start to pull out points on their one-on-ones. Just in terms of some of the key sales skills, right? Like how are we developing the champion, right? How are we influencing decision criteria? Some of those kind of basic sales skills that just need to continue to improve.
And when an organization has to start an initiative like activity tracking or the broader initiative around activity-led selling, I think the big problem that a lot of organizations run into is how do I capture all activities, right? I mean, a lot of time reps don't want to log activities, and they're also like communicating on different channels. They might be using an email channel with some prospects. They might be using LinkedIn. They might be using phone calls. They might be leaving voicemails. They might be meeting in person as well now that like the world is opening up post-COVID. So there are like activities happening across multiple channels, and this whole digital communication load has increased many folds in the last 4-5 years. So how can an organization set up like an activity capture or activity tracking program across their sales cycle?
Yeah, there's definitely challenges to it, right? There's more and more data, more and more platforms to use. I guess I'd say start small, right? Just like anything, right? Like crawl, walk, run approach, right? So start with one use case, and that's kind of what we started here. We started just capturing their emails and meetings, right? So start there, and yeah, we're missing out on the phone calls that they make on their cell phones and the text messages that they do, right? But we're capturing the vast majority of that, right? And then we expanded into actually recording the meetings that they hold, right? So that's kind of where we're at now. And again, I think that gets us vast majority of the activity that our AEs are doing. And then you continue to evolve from there.
I love the simplicity of it, like largely from a crawl, walk, run approach, where I think it's important to start small, get that right, move to the next channel, rather than like trying to boil the ocean in one go. But it's important to set that culture in, as you rightly mentioned, right? I think get started with it. Activity led selling can be like the way of life as the sales ops and managers and leaders start looking at their pipeline. I think activities could be a place where they start and then get on to other aspects of their review. So I think it's a great thing from a cultural standpoint as well to include. That brings me to the next point, right? And a lot of organizations face this challenge or pushback from their team that, okay, you're going to monitor my activities and I'm not very comfortable with it, or they might just feel that they are getting micromanaged. Like as a business, you have all the right to like capture business communication data, which is part of your organization and your customers. But then from a comfort standpoint, a lot of like salespeople might not be comfortable and they might feel they are getting micromanaged or they're getting constantly monitored. How do you like advise organizations and sales ops managers there, convince the users to be okay with this, and how can that be converted into an opportunity to like convince them about the value of doing this?
I think it goes back to some of the things we've spoken about, right? But the way I rolled it out in my last company, and same thing here, right? And if we make the parallel back to sports, Roger Federer, Nadal, best athletes in the world across all sports, they're reviewing their performance, right? They all have coaches, lots of coaches, right? Typically, but they're watching video, right? They're getting feedback. So I think I think that needs to be the mindset. And that's how, again, we rolled it out here in terms of, listen, these guys are the best in the world, right? If they can continue to improve and take feedback, then so can we, right? As sales professionals and just people trying to get better every day, right? So I think that being number one, right? And actually, sorry, quick story before I move on, but because I've had sales leaders and one sales leader, said to me, these guys are experienced enterprise sellers. Like I don't think we're going to record their calls, right? And I use that analogy with them, right? Back to the sports of, the best athletes in the world, they all review calls, right? We all can get better every day, right? And again, that seemed to resonate and kind of shift the mindset from the way we've done it. But then back to what we talked about, I think the second thing is, it's going to be Big Brother and an inspection point if that's how we use the data in terms of how many activities did you have this week? And if that's the only value that we get out of this, then it's going to feel like that. If we can, again, shift, which is difficult to do in terms of we all get pulled in so many directions, right? But if we really block off our calendars, block off 1 hour a week, right? Maybe it starts at 1 hour a week and just say, hey, I'm going to review a call as a coaching opportunity, right? So it's not an inspection point. It's a way for me to add value to my reps. And like I said, back to focusing on some of the core skills. Did I develop my champion? Did I ask open-ended questions? Did I influence his decision criteria, right? Did I find enough pain there, right? Like some of these basic sales skills, right? Can I focus on that and provide value back to my reps? Then it's not going to feel like inspection, right? Then they're going to feel like, okay, yeah, I can see that, I can use that, and I can, get better and improve my skills from there.
No, that's a great way to initiate some of these programs from an activity-led selling standpoint. And I think coaching is the way to go, right? It's more constructive. It gives it a positive spin compared to tracking. I think it's a great example on how organizations can initiate some of these programs and benefit from that. I think I also like a few studies which basically talk about positive impact of coaching on revenue generation. And a lot of companies that provide quality coaching have seen increase in annual revenues between 7 to 10%. And I think in your experience, we'd love to know, have you seen something similar and how these activity insights have improved the manager's coaching ability as well, and also in turn driven up the rep performance? So if you can probably throw some spotlight there or maybe share an example, that would be great as well.
Yeah, probably difficult to measure, but I don't doubt that metric at all. I guess I'll have to circle back with you on if we improve this, right? Like we just started some of these coaching sessions and again, focusing more now that we're recording some of the actual Zoom meetings and doing some of these peer-to-peer feedback, right? So we'll see kind of where that goes on the overall sales skills. But again, I don't doubt that for a second, right? In terms of the metric you just pointed out.
And are there like any examples from past that come to your mind off the radar? Anywhere where there was like an anecdotal example that you saw this happening? Any rep was not performing, and then you started seeing any significant improvement there?
I think when it comes to just overall, how are we forecasting and feeling about a deal, right? I think that's where we've seen a lot of these activity. That's the first example that came to mind in terms of, okay, here's the deal we're working on, but if we look at the activity of what's happened, right? Both what's happened on our side, our outreach, but like also what's come back from the customer, right? And how are they interacting with us? This was something we found early on, even at Cloud9, the first startup I was with, in terms of you actually wanted to see more movement in the deal price and stuff like that, because at least that meant the customer was engaged, right? We were having some dialogue. So that was an indicator that things were on the right track, right? And I think that's the same thing where we see the activity stuff as we come up with a strategy for forecasting and closing the deal, is just how's that activity look from the customer and us.
Yeah, so coming on to the last question of this first section, wanted to know from you as a vision of around sales productivity and its future. Where do you think we are headed? What would be the future of sales productivity?
Yeah, gotta get a little futuristic. I think we'll obviously see software continue to evolve and get better, provide better insights, not just the data, but better insights around coaching and connecting, right? And connecting all the various activities across the platforms. I mean, how many platforms do we have now in kind of the SaaS world in terms of Zoom and chat and outreach kind of cadences or sequences and those types of platforms. So I think that's one. And then also connecting how the person you're trying to connect with likes to do business. I'm sure we've all taken like those insights or kind of personality tests, stuff similar to that. But just like me personally, I will respond, right? Like if I know the person's done their homework, if they're trying to add value, I won't respond to just generic stuff. And then the other thing, like I'm pretty detail oriented. So like if there's a spelling mistake, right, in an email, like I get fixated on that and it's like I can't move off of that, right? But there's certain things like that you can give, like, hey, Abhijeet, when I reach out to Abhijeet, he likes to be connected with like this, right? I mean, I think we'll start to see stuff pop up that will connect those two dots to provide the SDRs or AEs or whoever, right, insights into how to better outreach.
Yeah, I think there are very interesting applications of how AI can be leveraged as GTM evolves, and I think productivity is top of mind for everyone. So I do see what you mean there. A very interesting example where how you're not just looking at tracking what activities we're doing or driving insights out of it. Obviously, automation is something that's happening and it's going big, but it's more about how the buyer needs to be spoken with, right? I mean, what would be the better propensity to get responses? I think that will be very interesting, right? I mean, there are a lot of conversations around seller following sales process versus a seller meeting the buyer where buyer wants to meet, right? And in buyer's journey. So, and there's already like a lot more focus around embedding the buying process and following that versus like pushing your sales process. So I think this takes it to the next level where you're like also getting the buyer's personality into the mix and how they like to be spoken to or what they like, what they dislike about like certain types of communication. So I think it's very interesting. I do like that angle quite a bit because we do ask this question to a lot of people around what they see as future of sales tech and revenue operations or sales productivity, and I think this definitely is a new angle that you explore. So thanks for sharing that. So with that, we come towards the end of our first section. Now it's on the second section, which is about rapid fire. It gives us more insight about you as a person, and love to know more about you there. What's the one book that you recently read and really enjoyed?
I just reread Essentialism. That one just again strikes a chord with with sales ops or me and my role. Just how many different directions you get pulled in. And then I also just read The Power Broker. I don't know if you ever heard of that, but it's about Robert Moses and kind of how he built New York. So it's a kind of a biography of a very large book, but just interesting, kind of the dynamics of New York City and how it was built. A lot of influence by Robert Moses. So that was an interesting book.
Yeah, it is. I'll definitely need to read out. New York is one of my favorite places in the world, so it's a great city. I always enjoyed my time there, so definitely a book that should be part of my bucket list. I'm gonna read that soon. I'm quite curious around the book you mentioned, Essentialism, and like how it's related. There are some principles around sales ops. Would you like to maybe double click and just give some examples on like what about the book you particularly enjoyed that basically has some parallel to sales ops, or how we can get some learnings out of it?
I think for me, it's just really, I guess it puts me in the right mindset or gives you some tools to think about in terms of really thinking about doing less, but doing it better, especially in our work today and kind of knowledge work in general, right? Like it's almost more important. I heard somebody say this, right? But it just, again, resonated in terms of it's almost more important that you spend time thinking about what you're going to do versus, again, just trying to do everything and being busy all day, right? Again, really thinking about what's going to drive results, right? That one, back to sales ops, right? You get hundreds of requests, right? And new fields and new processes and this and that, but you constantly have to kind of zoom out and think about the bigger picture of how this is going to ultimately drive revenue or something bigger within the company, right? Is this going to ultimately go us in the right direction? That's really kind of what it means for me.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. So I do agree, less is more. Smart work versus busy work. I think Naval Ravikant, I think, tweeted about it. Work like a lion, not like a cow. So what's your favorite part of being in sales ops?
I think hands down, it's working kind of with all the people cross-functionally across the org, and then solving interesting problems every day. I think that's what I love about it. It's always different, always something new to figure out.
And what's the least favorite part?
When you get into reactive or firefighting mode, which sometimes you can't help it. We're at the end of quarter here, so I'm probably going to jump to this call with lots of missed calls of needing to get deals done. I think that's my least favorite part, though, in terms of like it can be very reactive or it can be the dumping ground sometimes because they know that sales ops people will figure it out. So
Yeah, yeah, no, I feel you. So who's one RevOps leader you personally look up to and why?
yes, yeah. So the first person that came to mind was Adam Gerlinger. He's the VP of RevOps at Sysdig. He was when I was at my startup and kind of moving from an SDR to sales ops, right? He was the one that I reached out to because he worked with my wife at the time, and it really just kind of was open and sharing and just added value and kind of got me started on this path, right? And gave me some basic things to think about that were hugely impactful just in terms of systems and other things to think about kind of as you set up a sales ops function, right? So that was one that came to mind, and then I guess the second one would be Scott Berg, who was our COO at ServiceMax and eventually CEO. But really just, he was very good at assuming positive intent, right? And that was just something that, again, just always stuck with me, right? So API, assume positive intent, right? And I think if we can all carry that around, right, most people they're trying to do the right thing, right? And so give them the benefit of the doubt and then work it out from there, right? So those are two that come to mind.
Yeah, awesome. We'll definitely love to have them on our show sometime. Thanks for sharing that. So, what's one piece of advice that you received from someone that has stayed with you for a long time?
If you don't control your time, someone else will. This goes back to essentials and some of the stuff we talked about, right? But I've taken that to heart, right? I block my calendar, I time block it because a to-do list can be forever long, and the calendar cannot, right? You only have so many hours in the day, so that's been the one thing that's critical and kind of changed the way I approach every day and every week. The other one was just think for yourself. Everyone has a unique picture of how things work and function, and yours is as valuable as anyone's, right? That was something I have written down, and I tell all the SDRs that I'm, hiring right now too, right? But that was a quote from Kelly Slater, the pro surfer, right? But just a good reminder, right? That and we're here to add value. So
No, I think blocking focus time on calendar is so important. I mean, it's something which even I started a year back, and it's like given me so much time back, so much quality time to focus on big ticket items. Otherwise, like I was like doing 5 meetings a day, back to back. I felt like I was doing a lot, but it was all going down the drain. I had no clue what was happening, where my time was going. At the moment I started having those time blocks, it just gave me so much time to reflect upon everything, zoom out as you mentioned. So yeah, I can vouch for it. Great advice.
so you feel like you're making more progress on the key projects you need to.
Yeah, I do definitely, because I'm able to able to think the big picture. I'm able to come with fresh ideas, and it gives that break that's needed to energize yourself again, like working like a lion versus working like a cow. Yeah, you hunt, you rest, and then you go back. Whereas as a cow, you're grazing the whole day, right? So, yeah, I think that's what I like about it.
Right. Yeah, you're grazing. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Last question. What's one advice you'll give to folks who are starting their career in RevOps? What would you tell yourself 10 years back? What they should do to excel in RevOps?
Yeah, I guess two things that come to mind, right? One is hustle and find ways to add value to others. Like, I think if we, again, just approach every day, every week with that mindset, like, how can I add value to others, right? In sales ops, marketing, product marketing, engineering, whatever. Like, how can I add value? Asking that question and figuring out that, what you can do. And then kind of more tactical, I guess, would be know the systems, right? I think getting Salesforce certified and knowing that system and how it works and what it can and can't do really gives kind of a sales ops person kind of a competitive advantage. Because I see so many people try to create stuff, but they don't know how it kind of can work through the different systems, whether it's Salesforce or all the other systems you have it hooked up to Salesforce, right? But like know what's possible so you can create effective processes around that, right? So I think knowing the systems can be a huge advantage.
Great advice, and I think RevOps is in such a unique position where they are interacting with so many functions. It's a cross-functional, high-impact role. high visibility role as well. So there's so much of value that one can deliver in that role. So great advice for somebody who's beginning their career in RevOps. Just be there, out there, add value, think about like what you can do better across the stakeholders that you interact with, and be more strategic. I think that's one thing that as Nectar we also like try to talk about a lot more and educate, is all about becoming more strategic and just don't get into tactical firefighting. I mean, that happens, you have to do it, it's part of the job, but I think how you can be more strategic, like create a long-term strategy or a roadmap, and then add value, become a growth or productivity or revenue driver versus like a cost center managing systems or data, right? I think there's a big difference between the two. And I think RevOps is at that inflection point in our industry where it's getting more and more strategic, and it's becoming like an equal thought partner, having seat at the table when it comes to like taking those revenue impacting decisions in the organization. Thanks for joining us, Michael, today. It was lovely having you, and thanks for the candid chat, sharing your experience, taking us back in time. And yeah, I mean, I love the sports and sales analogy and your experience that you lived through that. So thanks again. It was lovely having you on our show.
Yeah, well, thank you as well. Thanks for the invite, and hopefully I added some values for your listeners. So thanks, Abhijeet.